Hello, welcome to this hopefully not too extended feature-length overview video of the Seashell. This is a pretty versatile little synth, so there's going to be a lot of things to cover. I definitely don't necessarily recommend that you watch this whole video in one sitting. I think what I've tried to curate with the order is a clear breakdown of chapters that will hopefully serve as a bit of a visual reference or a quick reference for reminders of button combos or like mode selections or how the vocal per octave routing works. So hopefully this is something that will serve as a resource that people can revisit and use supplementary to the full written manual. I'm going to try and keep the examples as musical as I can through this video, but yeah, there's quite a lot to cover. I hope you enjoy. This has been a really fun instrument to design and collaborate on the development of, so very excited to hear and see what people create with it. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. So the Seashell is designed to be very quick to navigate. There's an initialized state that you can retrieve by holding the 4 outmost buttons, like this. The wave folder will blink like that. And what this does is it resets all the parameters, all the routing configurations back to what's essentially a factory reset setting. So you now know what your oscillator routing is, what the envelope behavior is, how the pitch tracking will work. It serves as a nice blank canvas for starting to build a new patch, build a new voice. This init patch has been curated for very high versatility, so it's very much prioritizing the hardware. So as much as possible, there will be some sort of timbre effect from pretty much all the parameters, all the controls. This is the way that I like to normal or clear all the parameters on the Seashell as a fully blank slate. So I'll start with the 4-button init, just like that. I'll center my pitch pots, so I'll make sure they're all in their center dents. Generally, I'll bring the cutoff frequency down and the resonance down, just so that's a nice blank starting point. The FM toggle should be centered, that way there's no analog FM routing engaged. And then it's good to bring down all the analog attenuators. So that's the CV attenuators here and the CV symmetry bias. The envelope itself, it initializes to an attack release mode. Here we go. And we can hear everything stabilized tonally on middle C. And that's with the center dents of all the pitch controls. Okay, let's explore the top level controls of the Seashell. I've got a MIDI keyboard connected here, so I can play notes in. This is connected through the TRS MIDI jack on the back, and the Seashell actually ships with one of these 5-pin DIN to TRS MIDI dongle adapters. So yeah, any standard MIDI keyboard can be used. This way I can play notes in. I can just manually rate the filter if I want to control the timbre brightness. So it's quite a rich voice for an init patch, for a starting patch. So what we're actually hearing is the top oscillator is going through the wave folder. So it means that I can also adjust the wavefold slider. Some of that sort of squelchy sound coming in, and the lower voice is the pulse width modulation. So between these two voices, that's a lot of control of adding harmonics and taking away harmonics with the wave folder and filter together. Yeah, a lot of harmonic content to work with. So the envelope generator, you can see it's been triggering every time I play a MIDI note, or if I strike the envelope button. So this is actually producing an analog envelope signal from this jack. So it means that if you've got the Seashell running in conjunction with other patchable gear, so a semi-modular Eurorack system, something like that, you can branch this out and use the Seashell as a control source in that context. On the Seashell itself, this analog output actually normals to its own CV input. So that means we've got a way of directly modulating both the filter and the wavefolder on board. So I can bring up my attenuator here. So with the attack and release, I can control the shape of my envelope, and then the depth of that modulation as it's affecting the voice, affecting the filter. And same goes for the wavefolder. I can bring up my depth of modulation in parallel. Let's go with a more percussive voice. That's quite nice. So short attack, longer release. Especially with that wavefolder being opened by the envelope, it gets a really nice, almost FM-like, bell-like tone. Cool. So the pitch controls, they're by default they're quite freeform. So these are coarse tune, fine tune. So I'll tune my lower voice down an octave. The fine-tune pots, they are quite limited in range, so they're very much curated for detune. I think they'll go up and down just over a semitone, plus and minus. But it means you can really get that nice analog wonkiness if you've got them slightly detuned. And yeah, that's kind of it for the top level interface. It's very quick to just twiddle a few knobs and get something very musically useful. So we're currently monitoring the Seashell from its main stereo line output on the back. I've designed it to be very plug and play, so it's got this high-end output to be able to branch out in stereo to a mixer or sound card for live or studio production environments. But there was a bit of a challenge where I find a lot of monosynths or just a lot of analog synths to be quite dry instruments, quite direct. Which if we look at the outputs here, these are all the parallel modular level outputs of the filter, wavefolder, the direct waveforms. They are really dry and very direct by design, but they're meant to be patched out to a larger system and further processed or wave-shaped, filtered, and kind of curated for a more polished design, sound design result. So we kind of set ourselves a challenge of trying to build that in to a certain level at the main output. So that's what this pot here does by default. So this is the macro pot, but in our sort of default init state, it defaults to controlling what we call the diffuse engine. So this is a little bit of DSP wizardry. This has been the research and development by Kian, who's he's the brain behind the looper module. It's been a big research topic, but kind of the starting point was looking at a bit of my approach when I'm patching with a larger modular system, where if I've got certain synth voices, there are tricks that I use to process them. I might use all-pass filters to sort of spread the stereo width a little bit more, a little bit of chorus, a bit of maybe some reverb, just add a bit of ambience. Kind of you prepare the voice for a more polished result. And that's kind of what we tried to build into this single control, just to over a single knob, you've got a bit of ambience, a bit of space, it's a bit less dry, it's a bit less direct. It spreads the stereo width a little bit. It does push a little bit towards a reverberant space. So the algorithm itself, it's a stereo diffusion network, so it's taking this mono sound and really bouncing it around and modulating it in nice subtle ways. So that's it taken all the way down and just very dry. I think it sits in that vague sweet spot where it's hard to define. Like I like to consider a certain level of effects processing to be part of the synthesis. I think just in my workflow, the way that I have conceptualized the headspace of it, it's like there's certain things that I do to a wave shape that is effects processing, but it's very different from post-processing, where you'll have your tracks burned in and you're adding reverb or ambience after the fact. I think there's a level of processing that stays very much within the synthesis domain. So I think we've managed to strike that balance really well. Okay, let me dial in a quick sequence on this keyboard and then I can leave that to run while I play with the parameters a bit. Just a small amount of the diffuser, it takes from being that really direct, so to just setting it back, softening it a bit. Of course, it washes out quite a lot if you really max it. So because these are analog and I've got detune controls, it's quite nice to play with little amounts of detune between the voices. Sweet spot. So what I'll do, I'll pause this and I'm going to try some perfect interval tunings. There we are. So that's my PWM voice tuned up a perfect fifth from my top oscillator. Let's try the opposite actually. Let's go unison and then I'll tune my wavefolder up. Kind of playing with that naturally tuned harmonic overtone series. So the Seashell kind of introduces a bit of a new Instruō first, and that's a bit more of a proprietary software instrument, I guess outside of the VCV rack range that we've got. So yeah, this is the Seashell controller app, which runs standalone, as I've got it set up here, and it adds a lot more expanded interface and capability to the to the hardware. But it also has the ability to run as a VST3 plugin inside of a digital audio workstation. So I'm going to show a bit of an overview of the workflow that I've sort of personally started using within Ableton Live using the Seashell. So let me open up a new live session. Here we go. So I'm currently running Live 12. Still feel like I'm learning how to use this program. Okay, so the Seashell itself, it's connected to my computer over the USB-C cable, and it's able to do class-compliant audio and MIDI over that one cable. So I'm going to open up Live's preferences here quickly, and I'll be able to select Seashell as my audio input device. So this is a bit of a trick you can pull with on Mac, which is being able to split a different input sound card versus output sound card. But there are different workflows, different ways of working with the Seashell in different operating systems. The standalone app itself, it's cross-platform, so it's Windows, Mac, and Linux, if you're a Linux producer. At the moment, it's a VST3 plugin, as I'm shooting this video. So we've been testing, we're all Ableton Live users, so it's been thoroughly tested by us here. I think we're also using Reaper upstairs as well. So yeah, it's eventually we'll have it cross DAW as well. That's the plan. I've got my external headphones set up as my output, and that's going to my capture card recording device here. Well, there's one more thing I'm going to show actually. If you go to the MIDI tab here, you'll see the Seashell also shows up as a USB class compliant MIDI device. The way that we're using the plugin and the hardware, we're using elements of MIDI SysX, stuff like that. So make sure this is turned off. So you don't have your track input or output engaged for the Seashell as a device itself, and everything will behave nicely. So here we go. I have, see, I've already got audio coming in. So I'll set this to being stereo and monitor in. Here we go. So Seashell's already doing its thing. Yeah, I must have it running one of the presets or one of the expanded patches. Okay, so that's it coming in on an audio track, which means I can track this directly into Ableton, like into an audio channel. On a MIDI channel, I'm going to open up our plugin. So that's in VST3, Instruō, Seashell controller. Here we go. And I bet this is put on the wrong monitor. Oh, there it is. There we go. Okay, so this is the patch it's currently running. So this was on the hardware. Hardware takes priority, so if you open up the plugin, it will display what the hardware is actually doing under the hood. Yeah, so let's unextend this, and let's go with something a bit more minimal. I'm going to set up my computer keyboard as a MIDI keyboard, so as an input. Okay, set this to being. Cool, that's working. Okay, so I need to go gate to VCA. Let's bring down my attack and release times a bit. Oh, we're cycling. Here we go. Let's go to AR. Take down diffuse. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of stuff going on here. Let's bring up my set on transpose. There we go. Cool. So this is MIDI going into a MIDI channel on Ableton, going into the plugin, which is controlling the Seashell. I've used this quite a lot as a sort of basic workflow, like a lot of the trailers that we produced in the lead up to launching the Seashell. I did a lot of the sound design for them using just the Seashell as the exclusive sound source. So I was tracking it to Ableton, actually recorded those sessions as well, so I'll maybe publish them at some point. But yeah, set my rule that I can't use any post-processing outside of just dynamics and arrangement. So no effects, no plugins, just recording audio and cutting audio. So if I, there we go. So within Ableton in particular, there's a lot of capability here. So I think the cleaner workflow is actually going to be to try and keep things on a single channel. So in this case, if I go to audio effects, let's go with external audio effect. Here we go. So I've put this on this MIDI channel. Let me mute that audio channel in a moment and bring in audio from here. Here we go. So this is now all on a single MIDI channel. Open this up. So let's say I want to add some more movement or dynamic shaping to things. I could of course map MIDI, use a controller. I could use the extended features of the plugin. So I could pull an LFO here, sine wave, add that to filter cutoff, bring up macro. So that's one way to get a little bit more depth to a patch. But there's kind of another way within Ableton. So if I open this up, configure, let's add filter cutoff here. So a couple of fun tricks I can pull. I could use the modulators that are built into Live. Where do they live now? Modulators, here we go. And let's add in an LFO. Cool, map that here. Okay, so I need to adjust my offset a bit and get that in the right range. So yeah, if you're working within Ableton specifically, if you don't feel like you've got enough going on with the matrix mixer built into the Seashell engine, then add as many modulators as you want with this method. It's pretty deep. Another cool approach is if I add a few more things to my configuration. Let's go WAVEFOLD. Let's bring in our oscillator frequencies as well. Here we go. I'll tab over to track view. And so at the moment we're hearing the audio live, real time essentially, from the USB audio coming in to this audio effect. And this is all on a MIDI track. So if I set up my MIDI track, record, I think that did it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's undo that. So yeah, this is pretty cool. The Seashell itself is essentially a type of MIDI controller. So if I record in a clip, here we go. I've not actually recorded any audio at all. I've been drawing in automation. So now if I play this back, we have all this now customized pre-drawn automation going through all the parameters. So it's it's really I'm only just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible with the Seashell in this sort of context. Yeah, it's really exciting. I think a combination of this using some preset recall. I think this is going to be the sound design tool that I'm going to use just for everything moving forward. You know, use it to generate my kick voices, sample that in, pull that into a drum rack, and yeah, it's really quite exciting. So this is just a bit of an in a nutshell example as part of this video, but yeah, there's a lot more to come. I think we're just starting to figure out the scope of what the Seashell can actually do sort of in a production context and production environment. So yeah, hope you enjoy. Okay, let's talk filter routing. There are actually 8 different combinations of waveforms that can be routed to the filter, and they can be selected here in the plugin by just clicking and selecting whichever waveform you want from the waveform sections of the 2 oscillators. On the hardware, this can be accessed through the source button. So just tapping the source button will cycle through all the 8 combinations of different waveforms. Yeah, there is a system in place that makes it quite easy to navigate. So the rule of thumb is that a white LED indicates the top oscillator. This goes for a few elements of the Seashell, but it pertains to the filter routings. So white is top and amber is bottom. So we can see I've got my top wavefolder. So this is my primary waveform of the top. So each one's got primary, secondary, and primary, secondary of the lower oscillator as well. So I've got only my primary waveform of the top oscillator, which is the wavefolder. And we can see the source button is lit white. If I go to my secondary of the top oscillator, it stays white, but it's changed to being a pulsing animation. So the pulsing indicates it's on the secondary waveform. So that's our sawtooth wave there. So yeah, the same rule applies going down to the bottom. So I'm on my primary of the bottom oscillator, and that is indicated with amber. So that's just static amber for the primary and pulsing amber for the secondary, which again is another sawtooth wave. Yeah, so if I say I'll go to both primaries, then we're going from just white and adding an armor. So we get a mix of the 2 colors together, and same goes for both secondaries. So we've got amber and white together pulsing. The harder ones to visually differentiate, I guess, are the if you've got primary top, secondary bottom, then this is going to be static white with pulsing amber underneath, and vice versa. This will be static amber with pulsing white. So they're the ones that are the hardest to tell apart. But if you're on this one, which is secondary top, primary bottom, the wavefolder is disengaged, so we don't hear that wavefold effect in there. So it's yeah, this is quite wordy to describe, but I think the system we've come up with gives complete access to the 8 options via just the source button, and of course the user interface on the plugin gives you complete control and visibility of what's routed where. So here's a quick tip for routing selection on the hardware alone. There's a little shortcut that we built in. So if you double tap and hold the source button, that will immediately bring you back to the 2 primary waveforms as the sort of init state. So that's the first option. The first 4 are all combinations of 2 oscillators together. Then the latter 4 are the 4 individual ones. So here we've got primary, secondary, primary, secondary. Yeah, so it means that regardless of where you're at, you don't even necessarily need to know what color you're at and know what comes next. You can just quickly tap hold, and then if I want to go to wavefolder only, I know that's my 5th option. So here we go, and I'm already there. So it's yeah, a small amount of memorization in terms of what the order is, but it's very quick to access any of them just from the source button alone. The Seashell's VCA can be enabled or disabled here with this button at the envelope section. So that turns on or off the gate to VCA control. It can also be done on the hardware. If I hold the source button, you can see the LED button on the envelope is pulsing, so that indicates that the VCA is engaged. If I press and hold, it will toggle that state as well. So when it's static, it's bypassed the gate to VCA. When it's pulsing, it's engaged. Thing to note, the color of the envelope LED button, the color is actually irrelevant. The color indicates what mode the envelope's in, but it's specifically whether it's pulsing or static to indicate if the VCA is engaged or not. The Seashell's internal VCA is curated specifically for the stereo main output in that audio signal path. When it's engaged, like it currently is, you can hear it's curated with gate controlling the VCA, so that's following any notes played or if the envelope's triggered. This is quite a classic approach in a lot of subtractive synthesis patching, just synthesis in general, because a lot of the actual sound shaping and sculpting comes from timbral modification. More so than just loudness. I mean, loudness is a factor, but more often than not, the VCA's role is quite simple. It just gets the synth to shut up between notes. So if it was disengaged, then we're going to have a constant bed of sound. So what the gate VCA is doing is it's following the release tail of the envelope. So it's not just an abrupt closing of the VCA. So there's a natural enveloped attenuation, but the main key is it gives us silence between notes. So if I turn it off and we listen to the level that it sits static, you could hear that if I bring my filter cutoff all the way down, it's almost completely closed. I mean, there's definitely sound there, even if it's not audible within the context of what frequencies my oscillator's at or mixed into a larger track. If we looked at the VU meters of that channel, it's definitely going to have some signal at the bottom. And if I want to be able to open up close to what I had previously, I'm going to need to compensate quite a lot with a much higher depth of modulation. The release tail is going to be a bit different, and it's going to have this noise floor at the bottom essentially. It kind of darkens things up quite a lot more, because this is more of a low pass gate type shaping versus low pass filtering with VCA control. So add the gate back in. That's giving us silence in between. It means I can have my cutoff frequency can be a bit higher overall, so that there's a more prominent brightness per note. So yeah, that's where this technique comes into play. So the Seashell's filter controls are all very top level. The main filter cutoff knob is the top right here, and just above that is its resonance control. That's labelled with the Q. And you can see as I'm adjusting the hardware control over here on the screen, the plugin is following that movement directly. So we've got a real-time visualization of the parameter. If I mouse over it and adjust it in the plugin, you can see the marker turns white, so that indicates that the software's taken over. And this is now direct software control over the actual analog circuitry. It's the dial turning white here, so that's giving an actual real-time indication of where the hardware's control parameter is. So if I then turn the hardware, it will take over. So the hierarchy is that the hardware will take precedent. So if the hardware is moved, it's going to take over the control. But software can target the analog circuitry as well. So that way, if you're working within a DAW and you've got the VST running, you can be automating all the stuff, but you'll always be able to see in the software representation of where the hardware's controls are, which is quite handy. So the waveform routing is probably the more complicated part of the filter itself, which I've already covered with the source button. The filter, not a huge amount to it. It's 12 dB per octave, resonant low pass. I think it's a really nice sounding filter. It's a new circuit design versus any of the existing Instruō modules. And there may be some similarities here and there, but yeah, there's a bit of a story to how this came about. The very first Seashell prototype that I built, which I've still got on my desk upstairs, it was a bit of an experiment. I was trying out some circuits that I was interested in, and a bit more of a classic design. So the original Seashell had more of a low-pass gate circuit in it, which going with more of a West Coast approach, which we have retained and mimicked. But it was specifically in that circuit, it was using a Vactrol, which is a component that uses an LED and an LDR as part of the voltage control over the cutoff frequency. The issue is Vactrols, LDRs, light-dependent resistors, they are a no-go for modern designs because the components all contain a level of cadmium. So depending on territories, you're not allowed to distribute consumer items that have that in it. So it's that was a bit of a spanner in the works, because that filter sounded really great. So it still functions, but we can't sell it. So it's a bit of a conundrum. Like, it had its downfalls. Like what we've landed on is much more versatile. Like, the snappiness of this filter is really, really great. The Vactrol version, it sounded really sweet, but it was quite sluggish, which is quite typical of those low pass gate designs or Vactrol based designs. But yeah, we had to start from scratch, and we went with more of it started off with a very vanilla Sallen-Key filter topology, and I essentially passed it off to Noe, who is I've worked with for a good number of years now. So he's the resident analog filter expert. You'll probably be familiar with his Procyon stereo filter from last year. But yeah, really, he was up for the challenge. So basically, the design MO was we have this really nice Vactrol filter. Can you recreate that in more of a solid state topology? And the answer was yes. I think he's created an absolute beast with this. Let me go to just super saw. Take this down an octave. Yeah, there we go. There are many hours of tweaking. There are some very horrendously circuit bent prototypes in the building. But I think just the detail that he was able to recreate of the response of the resonance, it gets to a point, it never quite self-oscillates, but it gets really squelchy. It's got that thumpiness as well on the low end. Yeah, really versatile filter. And the range is really wide, so it does actually retain that original low-pass gate intent. This is it fully closed. There's definitely signal still there, but it's pretty low. As I bring up my envelope depth, getting that nice low thumping, very percussive. So yeah, the resonance is this Q-pot here. There's a detail to keep in mind. So I showed the filter cutoff having a direct software counterpart. The resonance is one of the handful of components or interface elements on the Seashell that is entirely in the analog domain. So that's very much a rollover from the original illegal filter design that we couldn't use. Just the way that the feedback path of the resonance is implemented. So the resonance is very set and forget, top level on the hardware. The other analog element is the CV input. So this is the envelope generating an actual analog envelope, normal to the CV input, and then being attenuated by the CV attenuator here. Yeah, so any digital control over the filter, if I override the filter cutoff here, it's going to be summing with whatever CV is applied to the CV input in the analog domain. Stop that sequence, manually play. Yeah, so certain things to bear in mind that are analog: resonance and the analog CV input. So all the other controls for the filter can be addressed in the digital domain as well. So Oscillator 2 on the Seashell has its own dedicated low frequency button, which can be used here on the hardware, and it's actually doubled here in the plugin as well, so you can remote toggle that here from software. What this does is it drops the register of the oscillator down into sub-audio territory, so it turns into a full voltage controllable LFO. It's kind of a rollover from early sketches, early concepts as I was designing the Seashell, where there's one point where the panel itself had labeling to indicate that the top oscillator was considered more of the carrier, the bottom being the modulator. So I think that kind of guided my choice of having parallel outputs for the lower oscillator, so it could work as a parallel waveform modulation source. But it's ended up being quite a useful resource where the Seashell itself can be self-patched. So if I go from my triangle LFO, send that to CV input. There we go. Bring on my attenuators. This is now the triangle LFO opening the filter, as well as opening or controlling the wavefold depth a little bit as well. Let's go with the sawtooth wave. That's quite nice. Slow it down a bit. Yeah, cool. Let's bring up a little bit of diffuse. Yeah, so some quite interesting micro patches that can be done just with the Seashell alone. I think like one of the workflows that I envisioned and I've been trying out with the Seashell is if I have it running in conjunction with a larger semi-modular system or a Eurorack case, then I can kind of break the Seashell into 3 parallel parts, where the top oscillator is a full voice essentially, where I've got some waveform options into wavefolding and resonant filter. The lower oscillator can be dropped to LF territories and parallel outputs. It's a full analog modulation source, and then of course there's the envelope generator, so that's got its own analog output and can be externally triggered. So yeah, it's 3 for 1. The left side here of the Seashell is the FM cross modulation bus controls. So you can see each oscillator's got the same set of parameters. There is an analog FM CV input jack that goes into an attenuverter for scale and inversion of the modulation signal, and then there's a 3-way routing toggle which can go to either linear or exponential for left or right, and that's the same for both toggle switches. Centering will disable the routing, so even if you've got a level of scale or inversion at the attenuverter, it's going to it's going to disable that routing if you're in the center position. So that's quite a good practice to just keep things a bit more stable, is start with your toggle centered, and then as you're exploring frequency modulation, you can choose the routing of that. So the left side of the toggle switch goes to linear FM, and to the right gives you exponential FM. Kind of the best rule of thumb for the difference between these two ranges is range. It's a different extremity in how much the external CV is going to adjust the frequency. So linear is going to deviate quite shallow around the center frequency with a modulation signal, and if it's exponential, it's going to control the frequency in an exponential slope, so you'll hit much higher frequencies. Yeah, so let's listen to that. I've got my lower oscillator set to low frequency. If I go to linear, bring my modulator up a bit in frequency, reduce the depth a bit. There we go. It's a nice little vibrato. If I add a bit of diffusion, yeah, it's Halloween somewhere. Yeah, so that's quite a subtle deviation around the center frequency, whereas if I go to exponential, we can hear that it's hitting a much higher peak, even at that really shallow depth through the attenuverter. So what I'll do to probably get a clearer reference of this if I self-patch and use the sawtooth wave. So let's put the sawtooth wave in. Red alert. So this is linear FM with the ramp, and it's quite a smooth, gradual, glissando in frequency. But then if I change this to exponential, there we go. It's a much more dramatic range in frequency sweep because it's increasing exponentially. If I max that depth out, it's actually sweeping through at volt per octave range. So whatever the peak to peak is of this, which should be about 10 volts, that's sweeping up 10 octaves of frequency, whereas linear, we're sweeping a linear range around that center frequency. So yeah, levels of extremity. Analog FM is quite a deep topic. I mean, FM in general is a massive topic, and that spans everything from a pair of analog oscillators controlling each other to the DX7, John Chowning's algorithms. It's a very broad range of sound design tools. But Seashell being a pair of analog oscillators, we're in the analog domain, but with some tricks that we can pull because we're in the digital controlled analog domain. So the way that I like to demonstrate and describe FM as a starting point is vibrato, because that's kind of a really practical and obvious musical use case. So what I'll do, I'll keep to sort of sine wave type tone, drop my lower oscillator down to low frequency territories and dial in a bit of linear FM. Back to spooky theremin territories. But yeah, this is a quite traditional vibrato sound where the modulator is sitting around 4 or 5 hertz. That's generally quite a good sweet spot to start with for vibrato. And we're hearing our carrier tone or sine wave that is just deviating at that vibrato rate. So this is FM in a nutshell. Like, this is it in its kind of simplest form. And I'm playing with the frequency of my carrier, which is still tunable, and then the sort of timbre effect of vibrato is a result of my modulator deviating the pitch. So there are only really 2 key parameters to manipulate here, which is modulation rate and modulation depth. So depth, that's my attenuverter here. So as I increase the depth, I'm immediately stepping out of that vibrato territory, and it's swinging the pitch quite aggressively. And then rate is the frequency of my modulator. So if I go down particularly low, it's just a slow wobble over that carrier. As I increase it faster, we start to approach more of a textural timbral effect. So let's explore the extremes more. I'll bring my frequency down and exit low frequency. So now my modulator is a fully fledged audio rate oscillator. So as I bring this up, there's almost like a threshold that you cross where you stop hearing it as a tone that's being wobbled to it being a timbre control. So it means that our ratio between frequencies is splitting off and creating all these complex sideband harmonics. And very much textural and atonal. So the term I like to use is clangorous, sort of metallic. And it's non-tonal because we're at a mismatched ratio. So ratio in FM is the the ratio between the two fundamental frequencies. So because this is digital controlled, I can center on middle C and achieve a pretty stable 1-to-1 ratio. We can hear as I bring up my depth, it's retained tonal, but it's just sort of adding a bit more harmonic distortion to it. But as soon as I move out of that 1-to-1 point, we're into this atonal clangorous territory. So that's very much analog FM. It's very hard to control that perfect integer multiple ratio, unlike in digital algorithms. So it means it can be quite limited in terms of what you can do, but there's quite a nice use case that I land on. So if I send something like this, which sustained is quite atonal and clangorous, but if I engage my VCA, it's more like a resonant structure of harmonics. Bring up my diffuse a little bit. There we go. We've got infinite bells. Yeah, that's a nice spot. Downside is it's quite unpredictable because these mismatched index ratios can be any analog floating point, essentially. So recreating it, you need to have a lot of precision to be able to recall specific frequencies. So a lot of it's trial and error, but you can land on some really nice organic sounding bell tones. So yeah, this could be paired with the spooky theremin sound, and that's your Halloween party scored. So the Seashell's FM bus actually goes a step further than I've even demonstrated so far. This is where things enter the classic complex oscillator territory, where we can get into chaotic circular FM algorithms. And the way this is done is we have the sine wave of the top oscillator is connected to and able to modulate the bottom oscillator's frequency, and the sine wave of that is going to the top oscillators, which is modulating its frequency. So we've then got top modulating bottom, which is modulating top, which is modulating bottom. Things get a little weird and a little chaotic. So yeah, let's hear how that sounds. Got things stable. We're listening to just the top oscillator's sine wave, or unfolded wavefold, through the filter. Let me go to linear FM on both, and I'll bring up some depth gradually. This is back to that modulator carrier clangorous FM. And now if I bring up the depth of modulation of the bottom, we're introducing that circular loop. Land in these more unstable positions. Things get even weirder if we kick this over to exponential, where the modulation depths are much more extreme. Especially in lower frequencies, we can settle in on these rhythmic ostinatos, which is a complete chaos, but pretty fun. Let's bring up some wavefold depth as well. Yeah, I use this patch surprisingly often. I think if anyone followed a lot of the trailers that we cut in the lead up to releasing the Seashell, I was using this patch quite a lot just to create a lot of broad bandwidth, just noise and chaos I could then like resample and cut up. Yeah, quite a fun noise box. Cool. Let's talk wavefolders. So wavefolding is a form of complex distortion where with classic distortion, soft clipping or hard clipping, there's a saturation point, there's a peak amplitude where the signal, if it's driven into that threshold, it will just hard clip or soft clip and hit a maximum. With wavefolding, this threshold becomes a reflection point. So as the peak signal approaches that threshold, instead of flattening out, it will reflect back in on itself, and from the positive peak it will push back through 0 volts to the negative and vice versa. So you end up with this sort of symmetrical folding of the peak amplitudes if it's a sine wave, for instance, which this is. So the result is we get this shift in timbre over the range, and it very much acts like a reverse of low-pass filtering in a lot of ways, where instead of starting with a sawtooth wave and reducing the harmonic content by filtering it, by removing it, I'm starting from a pure sine tone that is already in its softest form, and then I'm folding it to add this spectral content moving up. It's got a very distinctive sound, very West Coast synthesis approach method. Okay, let's control this with CV. So the envelope normals the CV input, and then there's an attenuator over control voltage into the filter. So if I just run a little sequence here. So it's giving me articulation per note, but there's no change in I'm not filtering anything out, I'm adding harmonic distortion and overtones to my bass. Okay, in terms of controls, we have the fader. That's the primary fold depth parameter. Now we can see here it has a a virtual double with the fold pot or fold knob in the wavefolder stage, and it's directly mirroring the movement of the fader. And same deal as the filter control. If I mouse over and adjust that from the software, it decouples the controls. So the cursor on the virtual knob is now white, static, and I can remotely target and control the analog wavefolder from software. Yeah, so the cursor as well, that's depicting the current hardware position, or the position of the hardware bot, which I guess the only difference is you take that knob and flatten it out, because I like faders over wavefolding. Yeah, as soon as I adjust the hardware, it's going to snap to and take priority. So next to my fold control in the plugin, we have a bias control. So this is a really nice detail in wavefolding that I've carried over from the CSL. Let me open my filter a bit. So there's my fold amount, and bias is a digitally controlled parameter. So it's a DC offset that's controlled from the software that is applied, summing in with the source signal going to the wavefolders, in this case the sine wave. So the sine wave itself, if I just fold that, we get that very symmetrical fold where the positive and negative peaks are folding in on themselves. If I DC bias it, it means that my sine wave is moved up slightly unipolar positive, which means that as I fold it, the positive peaks are going to fold sooner than the negative, so we end up with an asymmetrical wavefold profile. And this adds a nice little bit of movement and breath to a lot of what would otherwise be quite static wavefold tones. So we find something that's quite a little bit brighter. Let's go there. So now, as I'm adjusting my bias, as I'm just modulating it manually, it just adds a little bit more interest to the timbre. As soon as I leave it static, I'm wave shaping my raw waveform. So any of these could be my static tone that I'm then filtering. But then I can change the character of that starting tone. Yeah, I liken it to the way that PWM is approached a lot of the time, where when it's in motion, you get a lot more interest and just movement and chorusing to the static tone. Similar to here with variable bias over a wavefolder. So there are actually two ways this can be achieved, or two fundamental ways that this can be achieved on the Seashell. This is in the digital domain. So this is a software parameter that's applying an analog offset. If I pull this down, what I can actually do is not dissimilar from how I was doing Analogue FM, where the lower oscillator sine wave normals to the top FM input. There's actually an analog branch here in the hardware where that also goes to this attenuator, which, if I bring it up, is an analog symmetry bias signal attenuator. So this is the LFO sine wave of the bottom summing in with my top oscillator sine wave going into the wavefolder. in here, it's just adding a little bit of movement, whereas if I take it off, very static, but then just adding in that little bit of movement gets quite interesting. So that's two very different ways of achieving the same result, this in the analog domain versus this being a digitally applied offset. In the analog domain, it kind of opens things up to weirder territories where, similar to what I did with FM, using vibrato going into audio rate FM, this is an analog circuit, so I can be running my modulator at audio rate if I want. Get these weird formant tone. Quite like it for creating these sort of sci-fi pads. Bring up a bit of diffusion. So if I have quite a high symmetry modulation, higher than my fundamental tone, you can get these quite intense rumbly tones with a higher resonance. Yeah, pretty fun. Cool, so that's kind of the more chaotic side of things, where it's audio rate, symmetry, bias. Let me backtrack a little bit and go back to the plugin, where we have this DC bias control. So this got implemented as a response to that patch where I'm using the lower oscillator in LFO range to add some dynamic movement to it. Doing it in software frees up the second oscillator, so we can use that for other purposes or as part of a larger voice. But then this movement here being something that's quite critical, we came up with the animate control. So if I turn this on, you can see it's normaled both the animate controls for the top and bottom voice, focusing on this one here. It's normaled it to the 12 o'clock position. So this is kind of our default curated sweet spot, where what animate's doing is it's essentially a fixed frequency LFO modulator that is applied as a bias into the folder. So it just adds this foundation, slight movement and evolution to the tone. You can turn it down at the knob, or just disable it at this button here. If I max it out, this is opening up the full range of the DC bias that can be produced. It actually makes the bias pot itself redundant because it's already in full use. But in the middle, that's kind of a nice sweet spot to keep a little bit of manual offset something in. For disable animate, it's much more static. Yeah, it can be subtle depending on what else is going on, but that being a fundamental default in the Seashell's WAVEFOLD voice keeps things nice and musical, I think. So there's one additional little party trick for the wavefolder, and that's defined in the digital domain, here to the left of the controls. We can actually change from it being the sine wave of the top oscillator going into the wavefolder to being the sawtooth wave, which is a pretty crazy voice. I think because sawtooth waves are so bright in harmonics anyway for subtractive patching, it looks crazy in the time domain on an oscilloscope. Like you have the linear ramp, and it really sort of adds all these folds and patterns over the course of the ramp when you fold it. Yeah, it sounds really quite brittle. That's cool. Let's add a slow ramp over the wavefold depth. Another level of aggression, I think. Let's add some animate in as well. Very interesting timbres. Let's talk pulse width modulation. So this is the primary waveform feature of the lower oscillator. Yeah, so this is just the square wave going through the low pass filter. So yeah, it's one of the sources that can go to the filter, of course, but it's also got its own dedicated output jack here, which is just the direct pulse signal for patching to external gear. So square waves and sawtooth waves, they're kind of the classic duo. They're the classic go-to for subtractive synthesis. That's because they're both very rich in harmonic content, so there's a lot to subtract from it. There's a lot of brightness to sculpt out. Sawtooths maybe slightly more so. So a sawtooth wave, the spectral pattern is it contains every harmonic in the harmonic overtone series at a descending amplitude. So yeah, there's a lot to subtract. Square wave, it follows a very similar pattern of overtones as the sawtooth wave, but it skips every even harmonic number. So it's only the odd harmonics. So it's got a similar sort of brightness, but to me it's got a bit more of a nasally character, I think. I guess because it's missing every other overtone, so it's a bit more hollow sounding. Yeah, it's a useful ear training practice to sort of be familiar with the differences between a sawtooth and a square wave, because yeah, you hear a voice in a track, it's like, oh, how do I make that voice? And it's like determining whether it's saw or square based is quite a good indicator. Yeah, so square waves, they kind of come with their own unique superpower, if the circuitry allows, and that is to be able to vary the duty cycle. So a square wave is a 50-50 duty cycle, where it's full positive amplitude for half the duration and then negative, and that's what gives the classic odd harmonic pattern. But if we have the ability to shift the pulse width, shift the duty cycle, then you can change the ratio of high to low, and that's what this control is here, the pulse width slider. So let me open up a bit take my resonance down so it's just a bit more dry. And so already that's adding a lot of variable character to the raw square wave. If I double click, it'll center back on 50/50. Comparison, that's our sawtooth square. If I offset my pulse width, I think I can definitely get to a position where it's harder maybe a bit harder to differentiate between it being a sawtooth and a pulse. That's in comparison to like a pure square, which is, it's got that hollowness to it. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a spectrum of offset that gives you a different waveform, a different harmonic makeup, different character to play with. But where things get more interesting, I think, is when there's movement. So this is similar to what I was showing with the bias in the wavefolder, is if there's just a little bit of subtle movement in the background, it just creates a different range of character, because when it's very static, it's very noticeable, it's very obvious that it's a static waveform, whereas if there's movement, so if I engage animate, that's just adding this fixed rate, slow triangle LFO, just moving that pulse width a little bit. Let's bring resonance up a bit. When there's just a bit of movement there versus going back to static. Definitely doesn't have the same impact as that little bit of animation there. Yeah, a very useful waveform. Okay, animate. Let's explore that a little bit more directly. So the animate parameter is essentially an on or off state. It can be toggled on or off in the plugin here, this button, or on the hardware you can also address it by holding shift, and it's the LF button here. So if I tap that, it's going to toggle it on or off. Globally. So it means if you are running headless, you can still choose to bypass that natural movement that's the part of the init preset. Keep it a bit more static. Yeah, in the plugin, there's a bit more control, because you can set the range of depth of the animate discretely per pulse or wavefolder. And these can be software defined. So if you're within a DAW, you could run automation to that, or MIDI mapping. Actually, MIDI mapping these normal to module CC1. So it means that there's a bit of control over it, almost like a level of chorusing. Static. Chorused. Animation. Okay, let's explore the envelope generator section on the Seashell in a bit more detail. So the envelope's got 3 modes of operation they can function in. So the first one being AR, then we've got ADSR and looping AR. So these are selected down here in the mode section on the plugin. On the hardware, we can hold the shift button, and then tapping the envelope button will cycle through these 3 options. So color coding wise, the default state being the AR when you init the Seashell. That's white. Amber is the ADSR, and then the mix of amber and white is the looping AR. So let's engage my gate VCA. So ARs are really useful for like fixed time structures. Like say I've got a sequence running. There's a minor triad. If that tempo's very rigid, then the AR is going to give me a lot of consistency between notes. The range of these durations, the maximum range for both attack and release goes up to 10 seconds. If an envelope's triggered or re-triggered during the attack phase, it won't do anything. It's only when it goes into its decay or release stage, if it receives another clock, it'll re-trigger. So it means that you can get these offset rhythms by having your attack duration longer than your actual tempo, which is quite fun. So in terms of triggering our envelope, there are 3 ways of doing that. There's the button, which is this icon here. So these are all enabled by default. So you can trigger it from the button, external clock, or from MIDI. So let's go through each of these. So the button, if I disable it, no more button control. There we go. The external jack, that's for externally clocking. So I've got a very long patch cable here. There we go. That's a low frequency pulse from the TTSH. And that's done. Oh, I've got disabled, but we can see it's blinking away there. So if I enable it, there we go. External clocking from 2600. Very expansive use of it. The last option is, of course, MIDI. So if I disable that, if I turn off my gate to VCA, we'll hear. With the MIDI disabled to the envelope, it's still controlling the pitches, the MIDI notes, but I need to enable it for the MIDI notes to actually respond. Yeah, so that's our options and control scheme. I guess a difference here being we've got linear versus exponential. So if I'm in AR mode here, if I set to longer attack, longer release, this is giving me a linear ramp up and a linear ramp down, which can be quite nice for smooth, sort of evolving sounds, morphing sounds. But if it's a bit more musically percussive or yeah, like emulating an acoustic sound, then exponential suits that a lot better, a lot more naturally. So control-wise, attack and release have virtual controls that overtake but will then snap to an update from the hardware. If we go to ADSR, we'll see we've now got 4 parameters: attack, decay, sustain, release. We only have 2 knobs, but the way we've worked around this is enable my VCA again. Our release plot controls both decay and release. So there's a little bit of parameter mapping going on under the hood where the release tail, it's tightened up a little bit compared to the decay when it's in ADSR mode. So it means that there's a bit more tightness to staccato notes when we're playing. So we kind of fine-tuned that during beta to get a really immediately musical range of control when you're running headless and using ADSR mode. Sustain, of course, that's fixed at 50%. And it can be controlled, it can be MIDI mapped, it can be remotely controlled. But what I've found over the years of playing with synthesizers is that the sustain level is kind of secondary compared to the depth of your modulation. So this CV attenuator here, this allows me to more dynamically set my sustain level once I'm holding it. So it's missing its own hardware pot, but there's a secondary pot that lets us control the overall amplitude of the signals. And that leaves us with cycling. So this is quite a nice utility where we've essentially gained an LFO. If I set these to be in the same range, then it's a triangle LFO, or I can offset it and I've got a descending ramp or ascending ramp. So ascending's quite nice. Reverse swells of sort of chaotic FM. Good fun. It kind of suits sort of standalone little noise box use cases. So the Seashell's pitch control routing is actually definable. That can be done here on the plugin under the 1 volt per octave section, and this correlates to the 1 volt per octave jack and button on the hardware. So the color coding is the same as before, where white refers to the top oscillator and amber refers to the bottom. So I can actually choose where my pitch routing is defined, and this actually stems from analog routing, an actual software controlled switch. So if I have oscillator 1 routed, which is indicated in white on the button, this means my 1 volt per octave jack is electrically connected to the volt per octave input tracking of the top oscillator. And likewise, if it's the second oscillator is controlled, it's amber, it's the bottom. If it's lit both white and amber together, then that's it, tracking on both oscillators. So the button on the hardware, this actually just cycles through the 3 options of both 1 only or 2 only. You press and hold to disable them all. So let's try this in context with some actual analog voltage. So I've got a hexadecadone sequencer here. I'm going to run the main volt per octave output of the sequence in, and we hear no difference because I don't have anything engaged. So if I route it to just the top oscillator, we're currently hearing both wavefolder and pulse with a couple, like an octave offset between them. So there we go. We've got oscillator 2 droning below. If I change this, now I've got the sequence going to oscillator 2, but oscillator 1 static. And then that's it going to both. So let's expand this a bit more. I'll pull my clock source from the sequencer and run that into my envelope trigger. It's a bit intense. Here we go. It's quite a squelchy bass line. So this routing applies to both the analog routing of the volt per octave, but also defines where the MIDI control goes to. Got an octave here. There we are. So I've played a G now, and that's moved the whole thing up to G, but it's summing in with this actual analog signal. So this control scheme of both analog and digital combines together to control the oscillator pitch. Pitch control. There's a transposition engine built into the Seashell. It can be accessed just below the pitch routing controls here, under transpose. Very similar control scheme where we can define oscillator 1 or oscillator 2 as the target, or as it being engaged or disengaged on. This is mirrored on the hardware as well. If I hold shift, we'll see that the volt per octave button starts pulsing. So this is indicating an on state and which routings are defined for transposition. So same color scheme as before. If it's white, it's referring to the top oscillator. Amber is bottom oscillator, and both is both. And I can press and hold to disable both as well. So it means that just holding shift, I can quickly audition and see what the transposition configuration is. So I'll turn this on both. Here we go. And the default state for transposition is octaves, which is really quite a useful mechanic. Let me turn off my VCA. There we are. So by default with transposition engaged, it's essentially an additional octave control that you might have with a MIDI keyboard. Really handy for just quickly jumping between registers. Quite a lot of interesting voices that can come from this just by being able to quickly jump in octave ratios. There's one in particular I've played with quite a lot during beta testing. So let me recreate it quickly. So what I do is I disable anything but the wave folder. So we're just hearing the wavefold of the top voice. Envelope it a little bit. Yeah, this is going to be quite a low register to add some really low end rumbly stuff. And then what I do is I bring in my lower oscillator but via the wavefold analog symmetry offset. So this is the sine wave of the bottom, normal to here, normal to here. And that gives me this. Quite a long decay. I'm going to control my wavefold depth a little bit dynamically. Take resonance down a little bit. Because I'm summing the two analog signals together, I might need to fine tune a little bit just to get that most stable point. Yeah, that's cool. That's like just jumping up certain registers, you get these new levels of formant tones. Let's bring up a bit of the diffuse. To me, it sounds almost like the tones you can get from a digital FM voice, but in the analog domain. One more touch that I'd like to do, if I engage the linear FM of the bottom, means that I've got this lower fundamental of the top oscillator. just sort of spreads out that higher tone and makes it a bit more throaty almost. It's almost a physical modelling type character to it as well. I'll do one more example with the TRANSPOSE engine, where I will keep my diffusion up quite high. Let's go with 2 parallel waveforms, and I'll stop mixing my analog symmetry. Cool. What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually put in some more chromatic tones. So here's minor triad set up. I'll keep my gate to VCA off so I can just write it manually. Motion in. I'm going to change my envelope to be in cycling, looping AR, shallow amount of depth, so this way I can just get a little bit of automatic movement over the filter cutoff and the wavefold. Really nice for sort of more ambient tonal drone stuff. Yeah, transposition. Oscillator Sync's quite a prominent feature on the Seashell. It's even got its own dedicated sync button for engaging the sync ratios right up to the front. So if I press this, it's going to cycle through the 3 sync ratios that are built into the Seashell. So the way we can see this in the plugin, it's got its own sort of more graphical representation where I can jump to any of the sync ratios as I want. So the first one's depicted as white on the hardware, then amber, and then amber white together, and then off when it's off. So the button will turn on sync and cycle through the ratios. I press and hold the button to disable it on the hardware. So Oscillator Sync, I think, is quite it's a bit more of a deep topic than you might expect. I think it comes down to the inconsistency between many different analog oscillators and how they approach sync. So the circuits don't always behave the same. The timbres can slightly differ. It depends on the core circuitry, the circuit topology. Yeah, it's a deep topic. I think at some point I've got a video planned where I'm going to go through what I think are the 4 clear different types of sync. Yeah, so Seashell is specifically hard sync, and more specifically it's hard sync of the top oscillator to the bottom. So the bottom becomes our clocking oscillator that is synchronizing the frequency or frequency of the top oscillator. So what the sync mechanic does in practice is it forces a phase reset of the core waveform. So if we imagine a sawtooth ramp that's being generated constantly at a fixed rate, that's our sawtooth core. But then if I give it a clock at a non-matched ratio of frequency, it's going to force that sawtooth to reset more quickly and then ramp up. And because all the wave shaping is in the analog domain, this cascades onto all the wave shapes. And we get these interesting sort of overtone effects. So what we're listening to is the top oscillator, quite basic. So it's the unfolded sine wave of the top. We're not hearing the bottom at all. But what we'll notice is my lower oscillator is actually defining my frequency. And now my top oscillator's fundamental is more of a timbre control. So the Seashell has borrowed a lot of its sync capabilities from what I developed in the CSL previously. So that was kind of my previous exploration into, I guess, kind of sync synthesis approaches, because there are a lot of different timbres that you can get from this technique that are really musical, really powerful. And the specific unique approach that I think I've done here is the ratios. So what happens is when I cycle through these ratios, there are built-in frequency dividers under the hood on the Seashell. So the pulse signal from the bottom core that is used to synchronize the top, it's got 2 stages of subgeneration, of frequency division. So it means that the top ratio is 1:1, so it's clocking at the fundamental of the bottom oscillator. If I drop down 1, it's syncing from the sub-octave of the bottom, and 1 more, that's 2 sub-octaves. So it kind of adds these sub-harmonics to the whole equation. What I'm going to do, I'm going to disable sync just now. I'm going to run this sequence. So all we're hearing is the sequence controlling the pitch of the top oscillator unsynced, and my pitch tracking is going to both oscillators. So that's something to keep in mind. So if I engage sync, we've got this very dynamic timbre shift over. Let's go to a sub. So this kind of opens things up a little bit more in the low end. We're getting these harsher sort of like crunchy points, so that's like the hard sync where it's abruptly resetting the waveform. And ratio 3. So this is 2 sub-octaves of the fundamental of the clocking oscillator. Okay, let me go to my fundamental. So what you might notice at the moment, the way this sequence is controlling things, if I offset the ratio between my clocked and clocking oscillator, I'm kind of changing the waveform, changing the fundamental character, which is staying quite consistent. And that's because both oscillators are tracking the pitch control in parallel. So let's try something here. If I disable my top oscillator for its pitch tracking, my clocking oscillator is now following the sequence, and that's defining the fundamental pitch, but my synced oscillator is now static, and it kind of becomes this sort of resonator type Yeah, it's an interesting tone. It's quite resonant. Let's swap this round and go. So here, there's a little bit of a melodic element coming through, but it's more static on a pitch, and this is changing the ratio of the synced oscillator to a static fundamental. So it means I've got a static fundamental tone, and I'm changing the timbre based on the ratio offset. So there's kind of three ways to use it. You can use it for like variation over timbre, static resonator, or if you track them both together. It's almost like rolling dice and randomly drawing a wavetable, especially when it's the sub-ratios, because there are longer cycles of wave shape. So on the Seashell in particular, this is me leaving the filter static. If I envelope the filter, kind of accentuating all these interesting timbre points. But if I use the wave folder, maybe in addition, you get this really nice, almost like FM bell-like character. Cool. Let me simplify a bit. Go back to my fundamental ratio, and I'm going to add something else in. So I'll keep my wavefold CV down, filter, keep it static. FM actually plays quite a big role in this sort of sync synthesis technique, where if I FM the top oscillator, my synced oscillator, from the bottom, then I'm going to be creating more complex waveforms because of this FM influence and ratio. But because I'm hard syncing to the bottom, it's always going to stay tonal. So it's always going to be tonal, defined by my lower oscillator's fundamental pitch. So let's go linear FM. Bring up some depth. Can you already doing that? Just changing the depth of FM. Subtly changing the character. But now as I go off, we're getting these additional complex folds and cycles into the resulting wave shape. And again, if I go exponential, that's going to be a lot more pronounced. I think this is where it works even better when we go to a sub-ratio. Because there's more space between the synced cycles for a unique waveform to spread out. Let's go one more ratio down. Yeah. It's getting weird. Then we could add back in our wavefold. It really does get to those territories of not dissimilar from multiple orders of magnitude in digital FM, where like the overtones they get really bright, they get really interesting. complex oscillator with hard sync ratios. I think that's what I really explored most with the CSL, and all the key patches, all the key quirks and cross modulations, integrations of wavefolding. That's what I brought over to the Seashell. Such a diverse range of wave shapes and timbres. Okay, so this is the long section, I think. Everything in this video so far, I've pretty much been focusing in on the Seashell from a hardware perspective and its sort of hardware capabilities. I've had the plugin open on the screen for showing the expansion of interface and how that mirrors the hardware itself. And I've shown a bit with the DAW and showing the VST3 compatibility there. But the controller actually pushes things a little bit further than we've looked at so far. So let me move this down to scale it down a bit, and I'm going to hit this extend button here. There we go. So this is now the plugin in extended mode, and this is kind of the secret side of the Seashell. The Seashell is essentially Instruō's first self-contained semi-modular system. The hardware is digital controlled analog. We have the two oscillators, filter, wavefolder, envelope, but then underneath this expanded interface, it adds in an additional LFO and this 4x4 dynamic routable matrix mixer, which opens things up quite considerably. So it's very much a virtual front end, a virtual interface for programming this, for curating presets, for building more complex patches. But this is just the interface. The entire engine itself is actually running on the hardware. So you can curate a custom patch or store as preset, recall as presets, and this can be run headless completely on the hardware. So you could expand with MIDI control, CC map to all the nodes or elements of the expanded interface, and run headless without even needing the computer connected. So yeah, it's a really fun and powerful way to focus in on a voice and really sculpt things to a different level. Quite a lot to get into. So yeah, let's dive in. Let's start with a look at the control options in the matrix. So on the left here, we've got our modulation sources that we can select. And then on the bottom here, the various destinations that we can route to. So sources, a lot of it's quite straightforward. It's offsets, the envelope source, the new LFO. There's actually also a hardware CV input on the back. That's general purpose. It's assignable. So that can be brought in. And this has also got a lot of the MIDI capability as well, in addition to MIDI mapping. So MIDI, we can pull in velocity, pressure, note on, all the CCs. Our destinations, this adds in more discrete control over the VCA, which is also defined at this output level control. Diffuse amount, pulse width, everything's there. There are multiple options for how the oscillators can be addressed in terms of frequency control, because you can target them as a fine tune, like detune offset for more subtle modulation, full range. The transpose engine is also addressable, so that lets you essentially use the transposer as a quantizer. So you could run arpeggios from an LFO going into the quantizer, stuff like that. Yeah, it's really fun. So here's I've got a patch that I've sort of been exploring a bit that I think will probably make it in as a preset for launch, hopefully. I figured I'd sort of build that as an example. So standard practice that I do when working on a deeper patch like this. I showed the 4-button reset earlier on in the video. If you hold all 5 buttons, that will actually do a proper factory reset, and that will actually clear any notes saved in the transposer and clear your matrix. Because if you curate a patch here, send that to wavefold amount. There we go. So I've got a patch configured. If I do my 4-button reset, there we go. It will force it back to the default, sort of real-time mode, disables the LFO, and it maps our macro pot back to diffuse. If I re-extend, there we go. My patch hasn't gone anywhere. It just opens back up. So this can actually be toggled on the fly. If I hold Shift and tap Sync, that will let me toggle in and out of my extended and non-extended modes from the hardware. So it means that you could have a patch, you could then unplug and choose to either run more top-level hardware or load in your expanded patch. And what we'll see here, this is the dynamic element of the matrix. This is the true macro pot. So when it's non-extended, the macro pot defaults to controlling diffuse, but when it is extended, this macro dynamically scales every single node that is assigned on the plugin. So you can get a lot of actual dynamic movement from hardware through this single knob. Yeah, really fun. So I'm going to reset this here, and I've got some notes. So I'm going to build along and see if I can recreate the patch I was playing with earlier. So it's going to be a bit of a duophonic voice. I'm going to do some harmonization. So in terms of note control, I'm going to engage my transposition and set it to minor triad. Here we go. So I want to be listening to my wave folder and keep animate on, and my sawtooth. So my pulse wave. So let's bring up my frequency control. Take my gate to VCA off. Here's another little trick. When I'm extended, macro now controls the macro pot. But if I want to control diffuse, it's here in the software. But I could also hold Shift and then turn my macro pot, and then that's going to update and control diffuse. So there we go. The good practice when working on a preset in this way, it's not strictly necessary, but it's something that I've found to be a good starting point, is to essentially normal the hardware. So I've got attenuverters all the way down for my FM. FM routing is centered, so it's not going to either linear or exponential. And I'm going to attenuate all my analog attenuators, turn them down completely. So that's the two CV input attenuators and the the analog symmetry bias. Because those are resonance as well. It's a bit more set and forget because it's an analog only control. So if I set that down a bit conservative, then it means I can control a lot of my parameters in the digital domain, which will allow me to save it and recall it and keep a level of precision. So here we go. I'm going to be using this as a bit of a duophonic voice. So instead of what I did previously, where I was using my envelope output rooted in the analog domain, I'm going to target this and do this in the digital domain. So I'm going to select my envelope as a source and set my filter frequency as a destination. And here I can turn up my depth. So as you can see, if I turn my macro knob now, it's scaling this node that's sending the envelope to the filter cutoff. So it stays very hands-on. If I want to do something a bit more set and forget, I can just right-click on the node here and select lock, and then that's fixed at that 21. So now changing the macro, it's not going to affect that node. Cool. Okay, what else do I have in this? I'm going to do a sort of duophonic arpeggio where it's sort of harmonizing with itself. The way I'm going to do that, I'm going to send a sweep, or send a combination of the envelope sweep into the quantizer to control one of the voices, as well as some random voltages. So the random voltages, I'm going to use the LFO down here. So pull this in as a secondary source. And you can see the LFO's got a range of options. It's got the classic geometric waveforms. It's also got random, which is what I'm going to use here. So this is essentially like a clocked sample and hold. So I can even, it's going to be clocking at its own rate, giving me a new random position. So we could test that by so that's random steps going into my filter cutoff. So double click to clear any of the nodes. It's also double click to sort of normalize to any of the default sort of positions for any parameter. I'm going to go with a bit below 4 Hz, and I'm going to send this to Oscillator to transpose. So these are the destinations that I can do per oscillator. There's also a third oscillator pitch routing that I can select, which is the 1 volt per octave routing. So this is a duplicate of the oscillator 1 and 2 pitch control destinations, but this will specifically follow the routing as defined by the 1 volt per octave button and routing controls, which can be quite handy. It keeps a little bit more dynamic distribution over any modulation you might have. So I'm going to specifically keep to oscillator 2 here, and that is LFO random to transpose. Let's turn that up a bit. There we go. Is there anything else I need yet? I think that's good. So I should be able to start playing. So for this, I'm going to need to use my ADSR because I want to be able to hold sustain. So that's almost working for what I want. The thing is, because I've got 1 volt per octave routing engaged on both, any note I play is defining my fundamental, and then any random voltage going to the transposer is summing with that going to oscillator 2. So if I disable it here, cool, that's working. So that's giving me random notes across my my square wave. What I want to do, I want a little like flourish, a little burst of notes as I play. So I'm going to bring up a little bit in this envelope going to the transpose as well. I'll also change my envelope a little bit. And what I'll really do, I'm going to bring sustain down. So I want a bit of a sort of like sweep up. There we go. Maybe a bit too far, so I'll bring the depth down a bit. Cool, that's sounding nice. Got 2 more destinations, so I'm going to add in some wavefold control. Let's go with wavefold amount, and I can do a combination of things. I think I'll just keep it enveloped. There we go. So that's opening the wavefold depth as a key note. I'm going to invert this a bit just to show the bipolar nature. So if I turn my fader up and bring this down negative. Bring this up a bit more. Bring up animate a bit more. There we go, it's a bit more moving. Cool. Okay, and let's go with some diffuse. Yeah, I'll start it with a little bit. And then if I add in some envelope, maybe a bit of random voltage as well, this is going to be just randomizing per random step from the LFO, as well as giving a flourish of more spatialization, more diffusion. That's cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. What else I want to add to this? Bring my sweep down a little bit. There we go. So this is using the macro knob now, where if I bring it all the way down, I'm attenuating each of these nodes together. And as I turn it up, go down a few octaves. There we go. That's cool. Okay, so I've curated this patch. Let's save it as a preset. So I'll hit the save button up here. I need to call it something. Let's name it. Let's call it Frodo. Why not? Here we go. That's saved. There's Frodo. And means if I unextend, I'm back to just sort of like top level functionality of Seashell. Re-extend. Back to this patch. Cool. I guess to show a bit more, so this is me specifically kept all those analog only parameters all the way down. And doing this, if you patch with that in mind, you kind of lose out on certain things, or certain things you need to bear in mind. Is like if you want to have a bit of analog symmetry, then you might need to take some patch notes. I think eventually we're going to have some sort of storage method built into the plugin that will give you a visual reference that you can log for any of the analog things as a reminder. But if you keep it to focused on the hybrid controls, it means there's the option for total recall of presets. So let's see what other ones I've created here. Okay. Here's a little brass trumpet sound. Buzzsaw, got a chip tune. Quite a fun one. There's Frodo. we just built. It's just a little init patch that I was playing with as a reminder when I was working on this video. Here's a kick. This is one where I've used a combination of the decay time as the more prominent punchy, and then if I play staccato, it goes to the longer release tail. Octave plug. So that's randomizing octaves across different transpositions. Plucky bass. I think this one's not working because I'm using the sync ratio. If I change back to hertz, there we go. So that's a feature there with the LFO. You can sync the rate to the tempo of whatever your digital audio workstation is. Cool. And that's a fun one. There we go. That's a better register. I must have saved over it at some point. Analog telephone. So yeah, that's the Seashell extended. This is just a handful of little presets that I've been playing with during beta. This is kind of just the start. This is our first generation of the Seashell controller app. Many ideas that we've got on the whiteboard for expanding this further. So this video is very much a time capsule, a moment in time of the release feature set of the Seashell and its controller. But there's a lot more to come, a lot more things to try out and expand this with. So very much looking forward to hearing what people do with this instrument. So cool. I think I've got one more section I'm going to add into this video, but thanks for sticking through if you've watched it so far. I'm kind of throwing this in as a last little epilogue section, which is quite a useful one, but it kind of pertains to everything that we've covered so far. I've initialized this Seashell, so we're back to our sort of top level hardware control. There we go. Classic Seashell voice. What I'm going to do is go to ADSR. Cool. So what if I want more control over this hands-on? This is where MIDI mapping comes in quite useful. So this is the standalone version of the app. The Seashell plugin, it's got its own MIDI mapping engine in it. So if I open the settings, hit the MIDI icon, it's now MIDI learn. So what I've got 4 CCs on this little keyboard. So if I click on attack, it's MIDI learn, map that, let's do decay, map that, sustain, and release. Close that down, and now I have actual hardware controls over my ADSR. So limited to just 4 knobs on this, but that's the MIDI mapping function. But the thing to bear in mind, this is specifically for the TRS MIDI, the hardware MIDI on the Seashell. So you're training a MIDI map of whatever controller you've got to the Seashell, and it will retain that until you delete it or remap. Means that you can run completely headless if you've got the Seashell set up. If you have a fader bank or some other extensive MIDI controller, you just come off your own map and map it to everything. And this extends to the extended version of the plugin as well. By MIDI map, I can even map to each node in particular, and it's any of the mode selections, sync ratios, octave mapping, wave shaping. Yeah, it's extensive. So a lot of open-ended flexibility if you've got a MIDI controller to be able to map to whatever you want. Yeah, but that's the Seashell. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy, and really looking forward to seeing and hearing what people make of it. Cheers.